This podcast was produced by OAR FM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On Air.
Kia ora and welcome to the OI podcast, the Otago Institute for all things science, arts and Mātauranga Māori. And you can find us on OAR FM, 105.4 FM or 1575 AM or oar.org.nz. And I'm Trudi, and with me is
Dr. Barb. I am here. I'm running a little bit late, so excuse the
heavy breathing.
Heavy breathing. Oh my goodness, what a rush it's been this morning.
And what a well of a program we've got for you today. It's the wonders of wool, because Dr. Barb's just rushed in the studio, coming back directly from the Wairarapa Wool Weekend.
The Wairarapa Wool Week Festival. Oh my goodness. And it's the first of a series, what we hope will go forever and ever and ever. It's every second year, and it's offset with the Unwind Wool Festival here in Dunedin. So it's going to be fantastic. So next March, it's here in Dunedin, Unwind, for anyone who's keen on yarn. So it can be knitters, crocheters, just people who just like yarn as a fibre. Wool.
Or like to yarn while they're yarning.
Or like to yarn, yeah. So there's workshops, but there's also some really great talks and just a chance to sit there and knit with all your fellow enthusiasts. And it's really nice. There was 70-something people in Greytown last week. So it was quite a good turnout for an inaugural event like that. And it was absolutely fantastic. You know, if you're a knitter, or I guess if you're obsessed with any sort of craft, you'll know that your family and friends, their eyes glaze over about sort of a 2 to 5 minutes into the conversation. So having the opportunity to sit there and just kind of dive straight in, and nobody thinks you're crazy because everybody's just
absorbed in the wonders of wool.
Yes, totally absorbed. And of course, the Greytown's a beautiful place, very post-colonial, very colonial.
Yes,
so,
it is.
Bearing that in mind, but cute, sort of Gilmore Girls kind of cute. Really?
Oh, true. So
it's
anybody
really got that feel about it, I think.
The Gilmore Girls were big in the 1990s.
Yeah,
if
so it's
anybody
probably
wants.
showing my age a little bit. But yeah, no, very cute. And some of it was set in the Cobblestones Museum, which is lovely,
nice.
and that's where the Traders Hall is. So the other big thing is it's a good chance for all the indie dyers and little merchants and things that specialise in things for knitting or yarn. And of course, Greytown is home to Miss Maud, which is the fantastic haberdashery and fabric shop. Oh my goodness, it's amazing. Zips, buttons, gorgeous fabrics, gorgeous patterns. All the indie patterns are there. It's absolutely fantastic. I will not tell you how much I spent in that shop.
So indie, what's indie? I thought
independent.
It was rock. Oh.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe indie, when it's indie rock, that's independent rock, isn't it?
But isn't all rock independent? But never mind.
No, some of it's branded, like you're on a label. I think that's what it means, like...
Oh. Okay.
I don't know. Anyway, when I think of it as yarn, it's stuff that's, one person or a person and their mate in the garage dyeing yarn. So you get sort of limited runs.
Garage bands come indie, I
yeah,
suppose.
so I think that's kind of where the rock thing. Anyway, the fantastic thing, because it was this first inaugural one, and I think James, the guy who's organising it, James, who used to be here in Dunedin anyway, he's got this beautiful shop called Joy of Yarn. So do look that up online, because he has some fantastic yarns in there, and he himself is an indie yarn dyer.
Independent
dyer, yes.
Right.
Anyway, that's where you get all those sort of variegated colours and things. Sorry.
So it's quite an event for the Wairarapa, because it promotes that part of the world where most of us go over the hill from Wellington and driving somewhere else. So attracting 70 people, there must have been something there that attracted, besides their fascination with wool and dye.
Well, I think Greytown, I'm not sure, but I think the grey is named after Governor Grey.
I presume.
And the labels around, the signs around seem to indicate that a boat had got shipwrecked somewhere with a bunch of politicians on it, and they'd sort of got stuck there overnight on their way to Wellington. And I sort of thought, it's in the middle of the North Island. Where's the lighthouse? Where's the boats here? How can that possibly be?
Wasn't they get caught on a bar in a river or something?
No, I think it's just that the North Island's really narrow at that point. Anyway, I
got that far, and that was far enough. Not any further. We'll go over the hill tomorrow.
I was well out of my league there. But it is where gala apples come from. They developed the variety that's Gala apples, comes from Greytown, and that's gone all over the world. It's one of the most popular apple breeds in the world, eaten everywhere, and that's where it comes from, Greytown.
That's quite interesting because we've got fibre and food, which are kind of fundamental industries.
Yeah, and it's really known for food, and there is some lovely food in Greytown. This sounds like an advert for Greytown.
Lovely vineyards up there as well.
Are, yes. So
I'm not quite sure why they need wool to advertise Greytown.
Well, the vineyards are a bit north. They're sort of Martinborough, like a bit north. They're like 5-10 minutes in a car. So I went there on public transport. So I went to Wellington Airport in the plane, and then I got the shuttle from Wellington Airport to the Wellington train station, which was $11, and then I got the train from Wellington Station to Woodside, which is a funny little station on the track, and there's absolutely nothing there but the train station in a big park, and the bus comes and meets the train because it's the only reason for anyone to be there, I think, is the train. And that cost $19, and then it cost me $3 for the bus to get from there to Greytown. So it was really cheap transport from Wellington all the way in there. And I was lucky enough that my cousin and her partner were keen on brunch in Greytown, so they came and picked me up on the Sunday, because the public transport was lovely. It was a lovely train ride, and very efficient. Everything met up on time, but there are very few and far between trains.
Yes,
so I may have sat for 2 hours in the cafe at the train station waiting for it. No, sorry, did I say 2? 4 hours. 4. Anyway, I have brought along, because I thought this is an interview. So there's a lot of people do knitting podcasts. So while we were there was a couple of people who do knitting podcasts, and we decided to club together and have 3 interviewers. And one of the podcasts is actually a couple, so there was 4 of us interviewing. And the person we were interviewing was Gudrun Johnson. So she is a Shetland star, basically. So she's a superstar. She is the North American.
How many people live in the Shetlands?
Well, she doesn't actually live in the Shetlands.
So it's about Shetland wool people.
So there's, I think there's 2,500 people live in the Shetland. The Shetland Islands.
So it wouldn't take much to stand out.
Yeah, but Shetland yarn and Shetland knitting goes well beyond the Shetlands themselves.
So what's so special about Shetland yarn?
It's the wool. So
because the sheep eat seaweed or something.
Yeah, because of the breed of sheep, they've kind of evolved there in very harsh conditions. There's no trees on the Shetland Islands because it's very windy, it's very open to the sea, and partly it's the amazing range of colours. So I have brought the Shetland yarn. There's 2 companies, Jameson and Smith and Jameson and Jameson, which doesn't lend anything to the clarity.
It sounds like whiskey. Jameson's.
It does sound like whiskey. It's not, though. It's wool. And they both are made from Shetland sheep wool. And the crofters run their sheep all together through the year. And then whoever they have a relationship with, they send it either to Jameson or they send it to Jameson and Smith. Jameson actually have a mill on the islands since the 80s. And Jameson and Smith send it to Scotland somewhere, Edinburgh probably, and then come back offshore, and that comes back to the Shetland Islands to be dyed. But I will take a picture of us holding this because it's absolutely fantastic.
Beautiful. It's beautiful colour range here, people.
It is. And very subtle shifts, and that's how you get the patterns.
So are these naturally dyed? Or
no, these are dyed with dye. So the natural ones are on the back cover. So these aren't dyed at all. These are the natural colours, and there's sort of 11 recognised colours in the coloured sheep from the Shetland sheep. And the wool, when you feel it in the ball, it's a bit crunchy.
Yeah, it does.
And that's partly from the processing. So it's a type of wool that when it's made into a yarn, it's called woolen spun rather than worsted spun. And worsted spun, they sort of spin it so it's all the fibres are long and drawn together.
Oh, yeah.
Whereas woolen spun, all the fibres are sort of fluffed up.
Right.
And the wool is dyed, what they call in the fleece first, so just as locks, and then it goes through. And that's when you get these really beautiful heathered and speckledy colours. It's
that's nice
dyed as the different colours, and then they mix different ratios of the colours in this big machine, and it's like it fluffs it up and has it. So the property of this yarn is that once it's knitted, it does what's called bloom, and it gives it that sort of water-resistant thing, and it sort of all the fibres are tight here, so it's easy to knit, but then when you, what's called blocking, so you wet it and sort of stretch it out,
To make that.
the fibres all sort of go
Ping. Yeah.
and they fluff up, and then you get this very light garment, which is also
Quite
very
water-
warm because it's got all those little air pockets in it.
yeah.
And it's also a little bit water resistant as well, so that's really quite an amazing fibre. And because of the way of the Shetland knitting, where it's stranded, so there's the lace type of Shetland knitting, and then
I've
there's
seen
the
that, yeah.
stranded type, which has got
Yeah.
the colours behind it. And I've got heaps of these balls here to show you.
She does.
All the colours.
So do they have like Guernsey knits and stuff like that? Do they have patterns, or is it...
So they have patterns.
Do they?
I have
Yeah.
brought you some books to show you the patterns.
Oh, look at this fair old
I know,
design.
it's amazing. And this...
Sorry,
we're just looking at the books here. I'm just showing them to Trudi and Dom here. So these are both Gudrun's books, see, and this is partly why she's this famous person.
And
so,
she was at the Wairarapa.
So she was the guest star,
Ah,
yeah. So
yes.
she ran the first all-day workshop.
Right.
And then she ran 2 half-day workshops through it, which I was lucky enough to get tickets to all of them. So this is the Shetland Trader, which is her name, and it's her mother's brand name. So her great-grandfather, great-grandparents, and her grandparents all lived on Shetland, and her mother was one of the 1970s designers.
Oh, yeah,
so she talks a bit about it in the interview. So all of these designs in this book are ones that Gudrun has found her mother's designs or garments, and then she's written the pattern to go with them. And she's modified it a bit in places.
Nice.
But her mother wasn't making patterns, because that was before we had this big thing about patterns.
Right.
They were all you just knitted a jumper, and you just knitted it how your mother or aunt or grandmother or whoever taught you knitted it. And it wasn't sort of a written pattern thing. It's quite a new thing to have. Written patterns, yeah. It's quite strange. But yeah, so that's got a bit of a 70s flavour to it.
I have to say, she's got a very Viking name.
She has. So Gudrun is quite common in Germany. She was saying, it's very unusual. And I thought, it's not that. Because Ralph's German and his aunt's called Gudrun. I thought, no, it's quite a common name, isn't it? But no, apparently it's quite an uncommon name. But yeah, and the 2 colours is very Shetland. When you've got 2, so it looks like lots of colours, but in any one row, there's only two colours.
Yeah.
And that's where you get that really distinctive Shetland look.
Style, yeah.
And this pattern with the sort of wavy lace, that's called Old Shell, and that's also very distinctive, very different from the patterned look. And that sort of different islands have different,
yeah.
because of course there's a lot of islands up there. Yeah. Yeah, so without further ado, I think we'll just launch into the interview, and then we'll come back while you've got questions at the end. You've got a couple of minutes for...
Sounds fantastic. Let's listen.
Welcome to New Zealand, and thank you very much for coming to the Wairarapa Wool Week Festival. Yeah. And it's so amazing to have you here. And thank you also to James, who's hiding in the background there behind the cameras, for organising the Wairarapa Wool Week Festival. And we are so privileged to have you here for our podcasts, and we're doing a special joint podcast today. So today we have myself from the OI, the Otago Institute for Arts and Sciences, and we also have Alana. Mm-hmm.
Hello.
And would you like to tell us all about your podcast, Alana?
Oh, I have a podcast called Thank You for Knitting, and I own a wool shop in Auckland called Lupine Wool Company, and I design under Black Cat Knit Co. I'm complicated.
It's a fantastic shop as well.
Oh, thank
and
you.
we also over here have Bibi and Stephen.
Hi.
Hi, Bibi.
And I'm Stephen.
And we're just another knitting podcast.
Not just another knitting podcast, but another knitting podcast. And what's your fantastic knitting podcast called?
Just another.
Just another. That's fantastic.
New Zealanders have this way of naming things as they are, and that's what we embrace that.
Yeah, fantastic.
And I have a knitting podcast
And
too.
you have a knitting podcast as well.
It's called Shetland Trader Chats.
It's fantastic.
Exciting.
Yeah, we were just watching it this morning.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. So we are just here for like a bit of a chat, really, because we've got you here. You are the superstar from the Shetland Isle all the way. Now, have you come from
It
the Shetland?
actually says that on my name.
Yes, Shetland superstar. Have you come actually from the Shetlands to get here?
No. And you can't call it the Shetlands. Do you know that?
I didn't know that.
No. The Shetland Islands or just Shetland. So whenever someone says it, like I have to immediately correct them. Sorry. But no, I have not come from Shetland. I have come from Massachusetts for this trip, which was still a long way.
And what is the Shetland trader doing in Massachusetts? May we ask?
The Shetland trader married an American 27-ish years ago, and that's how I ended up in this country. With some time spent back in Scotland, including some time in Shetland. Many trips to Shetland.
But you have a long family history with Shetland.
Yes, my great-grandparents are from Shetland, and I was born there, but I mostly grew up in mainland Scotland. So my parents left Shetland when I was 5, and I grew up partly on the west coast of Scotland in Edinburgh, and met my husband in Edinburgh, ended up over here. My parents retired back to Shetland 20 years ago, and that coincided with when I was starting to design knitwear, so really getting into it at that point. So really from the early days of visiting them in Shetland, as well as reacquainting myself with Shetland, because I didn't really remember it from being a kid there. And we didn't visit much, from mainland Scotland. It's still a long trip up to Shetland. So I wasn't very connected to it growing up, really. But when they retired, we would visit them, and I was knitting, so I was immediately exploring the knitting traditions. Like, that was one of the first things I did. They very kindly moved next door, essentially, to Jameson's mill. So I immediately was loading up on yarn from the mill on one of my very first trips there. And I've been able to visit a lot over those 20 years. So I've gotten to know it as an adult. And it's very much influenced, my whole knitting journey and design and all of that. And now I'm the brand director for Simply Shetland, which distributes Jameson's yarn in North America. So it's a big full circle for me, and I certainly feel like I come from Shetland now, like that, but that has been over the course of these past 20 years, like as an adult, getting to know it again, and being connected, not just via extended family, but the knitting aspects.
So did you start as a knitter or a designer? Because you've got designing in your family, haven't you?
Yes, my mum designed knitwear in Shetland in the 70s when I was a baby and a toddler. She was not a knitter, so she did not teach me to knit. And when my parents left Shetland, she wasn't involved in anything textile related after that. So again, growing up, it wasn't like I was surrounded by that. I knew mum had done it, and she had kept, some photos and things like that, and a few pieces of knitwear, that she had designed. I started as a knitter. I learned to knit as a kid, probably, 9 or something like that.
Who taught you to knit?
It was a school teacher on an island on the west coast of Scotland. So we lived for 5 years on the Isle of Rum, which is in the Inner Hebrides, and it's a very small island, small community. At one point, it was just me and my younger brother at the school.
Wow.
And it was a nature reserve when we lived there. So you only lived on the island if you had a job in relation to the nature reserve. My dad was the warden.
What's a warden? Is that like...
Is
it like a sheriff or is it like a mayor?
Yeah. It's not like it's nothing like police related. Yes, it's nature.
It's nature related.
Nature conservancy. Yes, nature related. So he was kind of in charge of the running of the island and protecting various aspects of it. And there was no secondary school on the island, so my older brother boarded on Skye the whole time that we lived there. Anyway, that's where I learned to knit. I remember a school teacher taught me, and pretty sure I knit like a pastel coloured vest in an acrylic yarn. That's what I remember, sort of squeakiness of the yarn and stuff. And then I didn't really do it, until I was an adult. And actually, we had moved to Massachusetts for the first time, and because we've moved there multiple times, we keep going back to Massachusetts.
feel like there's a song there somewhere.
There must be. Yes, there is. I'm pretty sure there is. And my daughter, it was 5 at the time, and somebody else had made her a blanket. I think it was actually a crochet blanket, and she was super attached to it, and we unfortunately lost it in the Reykjavik, the Iceland airport, Keflavik, on our move over, and I was like, yeah, we're not getting that back. And I walked past this yarn store in Northampton, Massachusetts, which is called Northampton Wools, and I saw this poncho in the window, and I was like, maybe I could make her something, and I went in and asked for the pattern and the yarn and everything, and I remember the person I spoke to sort of saying, do you know how to like pick up stitches? And because it was 2 rectangles, but you did have to pick up stitches after you joined them for the neckband. I had no idea what she was talking about. I was like, yeah, I know how to do that. For some reason, I was too proud to say no, what I'm talking about. And I think my first book was like The Idiot's Guide to Knitting or something like that, And I was like, I just went for it. Yeah. Made it. Maya, my daughter, absolutely loved it, wore it to death when she was, a little kid. She still has it. She's 25 now, and actually she just moved out to San Francisco. Before she left, she was like, Mom, poncho's kind of falling apart. Could you, fix it? And she brought it, and it was just completely coming apart, just at the seams. It's like my first seaming. But even so, 20 years later we're talking about.
It's pretty impressive.
So I gave it, a refresh, and off she went, took it with her. Yeah. So that was really kind of my launch into knitting again, and that whole area, I was meeting a lot of other mothers, young mothers and stuff like that. It was a very fibery, loving area, lots of people spinning and knitting and stuff like that. So I just got really into the knitting side of things, and then I just started to, as you do, go off
on a piece,
with patterns, maybe I'll just tweak this or do this thing myself, and that was kind of the start of it. And did but not for selling pattern purposes. It was just I was just kind of making things up,
What inspired you to first sell a pattern?
Well, it was a couple of years after I had started knitting again, and we were living in Colorado at the time, I remember, and I think I had, was starting to sort of find other people's blogs, and this was right before Ravelry started, or just right at that time when they were sort of beta testers for Ravelry, and Nitty.com was around, so I was aware of that, and they had this whole thing of submit a pattern, and just kind of it was obviously free knitting patterns on there, and so I just kind of on a whim I'd made this skirt for Maya. I'd knit this skirt, and it was made from hempathy yarn, which is Elspeth Levald's yarn. So it was hemp and something else, I forget. Wow. But actually it had I used a sort of Shetland lace pattern on it, so it was a stripy skirt, and I'd made it for her, and I thought, maybe I'll just see what happens, and submitted it, and that was really the start of it, because I had no clue. I didn't have a knitting blog myself at that point, and Amy Singer, who runs Nitty, said, well, you probably should have one when this comes out, because people will want to know more about you. Right. So I'm like, okay. And so I started a blog, and I needed a name for it. And so I used the Shetland Trader, which was the name of my mum's business. Right. When she had
also
it.
The books now, right?
Now the books, that was kind of what I ended up publishing under. I use my own name as well, but it's always been the Shetland Trader, used as well, and that was the blog. So that was the first published design.
So when you're designing, do you design on paper and then do the knitting, or do you design by knitting?
Mostly, it's certainly in the earlier stages of designing, I had to do the knitting part first and make notes and things like that as I went along. I became able to do a certain amount of the written process ahead of time as I got more experience. And certainly if you were repeating a similar construction or something like that, then you can know, you can kind of go ahead and get a lot of that math done and things like that. But if it's any kind of unusual construction that I haven't quite done before, then I'm always knitting it first. kind of working ahead of
experience.
myself a little bit in terms of having information there, but probably not doing any of the grading and stuff like that until I have finished at least one sample myself. Yeah.
And do you do all your own grading?
I do, mostly. The only time I haven't is when I was on the Brooklyn Tweed design team. And we didn't have to.
Wow.
Which in a way...
So they have a team that does
What a
it.
luxury to not have to do your own grading.
Yeah, I mean, I think I felt a little bit protective of it because... You know, because it's then out of your hands. So we would make one size, and we would make essentially a giant stitch map on Illustrator. So you would actually map out every single stitch for one size, and then that would go to the tech editors, and they would do the grading. You know. So that was the only time that I haven't done my own grading. And I always use, you know, tech editors after I've, you know, applied my math and have it checked and all that kind of thing. But I think I prefer doing my own grading.
It's an art form more than just straight maths. That's what I learned.
It is. And there's a lot of nuances, you know, and it's very challenging because you're working from standard body measurements. But pretty much nobody's body is like that. So, you know, you're trying very hard to sort of accommodate, you know, lots of different sizes and shapes and short torsos, long torsos. You know, you can't write a pattern for everybody. That's unfortunately the reality. But because there are so many tutorials now and so many, and people have had so much exposure to tutorials and classes and everything, thankfully we have a lot more tools to, you know, guide people to resources where they can make modifications, whether it's putting in bust darts or something that they need to do.
And I think that for myself, that's where I find it's really useful when there's actually not so much the pattern is written with all the... I mean, it's great to have a range of particularly large bust sizes and a large range of sizes and a really good indication of whether it's negative ease that you're looking for or positive ease or how much. But also in the pattern when there's a really good indication of if you want to put in a bust dart, here's where you should do it. If you've got like just those kind of general kind of things, rather than just having the pattern written out, but having that kind of general idea of, you know, if you want to have a longer torso, this is the section that you want to expand on. And I think that's kind of where it goes from a maths to an art, like you were saying.
Like ideally every knitter who wants to consistently make themselves garments would learn how to modify for their own body any pattern that they're using.
I think they do, and I'm sure it's the same. I've only just gotten into sewing, but I know that's going to be the case there too. It's like learning where I need to make adjustments for, you know, various sewing patterns, you know, similarly, because
when you are designing, I mean, do you design primarily for yourself or things that you'd like to see, or do you give any sort of consideration for sort of like men's patterns or anything?
I've done a few men's patterns, and it's funny that you say that actually, because somebody had posted earlier today all these different sweaters and cardigans that she has made for her husband, I think, and two of them are cardigan patterns that are Brooklyn Tweed ones actually that I did. And it made me kind of go, oh yeah, I need to do more men's patterns again. So I haven't done that many. I've done those two cardigans, and I have done, I did like a unisex version of my Porty pullover that I have on just now. But I would like to do more.
It is amazing how difficult it is to find men's patterns.
It is very much so. I mean, especially even in the unisex patterns that, you know, that I've seen often aren't truly unisex.
I don't really believe in unisex.
You've got to really look at, you know, in the pattern as to, you know, which parts you actually vary, but you have to make those decisions yourself. It's nice when you actually do come across, you know, a pattern that you can sort of go, oh, I can knit that. And I can wear it for me.
Because particularly arm to chest ratios are on average different. So when someone says it's unisex but it hasn't been graded in that way.
We've just been talking about grading for bust sizes. And it's like,
different bust size. Yes. And the body proportions are also different in terms of kind of arm size. And
Yeah, I mean, there's so many modifications
even point
to be made.
across your shoulder.
Yeah,
It's quite different because I want to knit for my son and obviously for Stephen as well, and I'm trying to find. There are a very small range of specifically knit for men patterns, which is really interesting because I guess it's a mostly female industry.
Yeah,
which is nowadays.
I don't know. I mean, it's the same with sewing. Most of the patterns are made for women or children. It's just children's patterns as well. But I think it's actually because, like, men's patterns, they're like men's. Not you personally, obviously, but men's clothing in the last century are generally very boring.
Basic.
Apart from the little blip where the 70s, 80s were, perhaps. But really, in general, like shirt and blazer and trousers or shorts, and and it's really
it's more variety.
It's kind of boring. Like there's not, and the colour choices and stuff is the same. It's kind of boring in general for menswear, and particularly I think in New Zealand as opposed to.
Do you want to fight back, Stephen?
Yeah.
Well, I think New Zealanders are quite conservative in their
I think their dress is quite conservative.
This kind of thing is very out there.
Yeah, I mean, I was uncomfortable wearing this, but I mean, it was interesting that you talked about Brooklyn Tweed and your designs for Brooklyn Tweed because Brooklyn Tweed is where I've found many of the patterns that I've actually knit because they do have a good variety.
Jared,
it does.
But bringing up that notion of sort of like patterns for women and stuff, that also goes the other way. That there are a lot of people using gender neutral, pronouns, including my own kid now. Sage loves to wear and wants to wear things like with the balloon sleeves or like the dress from
those balloon sleeves are amazing.
From the Shetland Trader, and has worn them and they look amazing on them. So I think we have to obviously be cognizant of that aspect as well.
Ideas of gender and
and what you're allowed to wear. Like no, that's a woman's pattern. So
Well, what I really like is patterns when they've got the actual dimensions. So
doesn't matter.
So you've got your bicep dimension and your chest measurement and your waist and your hip measurement, and then you can your self-graded for between them.
Which is
and
why
I think
classes on sizing and things like that are some of the most popular ones that people want to take because they want help with that. And yes, as long as you have those dimensions there, then you can look at the separate parts and kind of go, okay, well, I need the chest to be this size, but I don't need the arm, circumference to be that or whatever. Because again, going back to the standard sizing charts, it's sort of like this gets bigger, so therefore everything gets bigger. Well, no, and then you get these really wide necks and things like that.
And I have that problem all the time because I have quite a large chest measurement, but I have really quite narrow and slopey shoulders. So everything just falls off my shoulders. And it's really annoying.
So you want to be able to make adjustments. And that's the reason I knit and sew, so I can have something that fits my
fits,
which is fantastic.
And it's really only the last 100 years that hasn't been the case because all of human history before that, people's clothes were made. Either they made them themselves or someone made them for them if they were richer.
That's right.
It's really just that ready-to-wear kind of culture that's come in. And that's where we're really getting into this fast fashion and, things that are just made to a size. And that whole sizing system is for the manufacturing part of it. It's not for the person who's buying it. It's so that they can have their numbers.
So Gudrun, when you when you knit now, do you knit your own patterns or do you still knit other people's patterns? It must be difficult.
I don't have time, unfortunately, to knit other people's patterns very often. I do try and do it at least once a year. Usually it's just a hat or somebody else or something like that. Well, just to see how somebody else has written a pattern and stuff like that. I always learn something from that, that way they've done a chart or something like that. So it's not often a garment, unfortunately. I mean, I wish I had the time because there's tons of stuff that comes out that I'm like, I'd like that, But no, I don't very often knit other people's patterns.
And you have a lot of strings in your bow as well. So you teach, you knit, you design patterns. You're the brand person for it. So of all of these things, which kind of brings you the most joy? Like which part of your
tricky.
I mean, I think it is the designing and like sharing that process, because it's lovely to be able to share like as you're doing it and get the enthusiasm as you're working through it, because it takes a long time. And so when you have to work on something that has to be kept secret, like that's the hardest, especially a book or something. It's like, well, I can't share any of this for like, I don't know, 2 years, depending on how long that process is.
And then by the time you can share it, you're over it.
Yeah,
so you don't want to.
Exactly. And I mean, that is definitely something that I think I'm very aware of, and I know lots of other designers are now too, that there's so much produced and so much new stuff, and there is this sense of like always having to bring something new out and like churn it out and then forgetting about the old patterns. And I definitely have made an effort over the years to revisit older patterns, and maybe it's to revamp them, to do something different with them. I'm actually doing something with this cardigan pattern that was an early pattern that I published with Twist Collective called Audrey and Unst, and it was a cardigan with a little lace, Shetland lace pattern in it.
Nice.
And I gave it a revamp a few years ago because it was a fitted cropped cardigan originally, and then a few years ago I added in a kind of more A-line shape, but still with a lot of the same construction elements. And then now I'm about to release it like as a vest pattern as well.
That sounds lovely.
So it's really nice though to see it get to still be relevant, because so many patterns are, but there is this need for, what's the newest thing, or have you hit the latest such and such.
It can be a little bit stressful. Like we have such a saturated market now of patterns, which is wonderful and exciting. But I appreciated that about doing your classes. Like you were talking about we call it feather and fan. I don't know what you call it, but that standard sort of lace, the Shetland lace,
old shell
lace, and the garter stitch haps, and then the Fair Isle, and the idea of kind of having one thing. You can do so much with that one thing.
Yes.
I mean, the idea of just having the yarn that you represent, Jameson's, 220 colors of spindrift or something like that. You could just knit for the rest of your life in that yarn.
Yeah, and I would be perfectly happy doing that. I would say that having that job, what's nice about it is I can tie in all of the elements that I have done, designing, teaching, working with this product, which does require education around it, and I have used it, since the beginning of my designing days. I have worked in Shetland wool, not exclusively.
Is it because your mother was associated with the Shetland trader, or the designs were, or just because you had a Shetland?
I mean, I think because it coincided, like I said, my career coincided at the start of it with them returning to Shetland. And then, yes, I was like looking at the knitting traditions, buying wool there. So my sort of early stash was Shetland wool. And some of the sort of first things I made for my kids, who were, very small at the time, were kind of recreations of things that she had designed for me and my siblings as kids, but they were just kind of, I didn't write patterns for them. I just was like, I'll just copy this. So I had Shetland wool in my stash very early on, just because
it's a very Elizabeth Zimmerman type approach to knitting, isn't it? I
guess, yeah.
Do you currently knit with just Jamieson's, or do you also, how often do you knit with other yarns?
At the moment, I don't knit with anything else. I mean, occasionally, like I have some socks, on the go that are in something else, and but mostly, if I'm designing, it needs to be in the Jamieson's, because it needs to be to promote this product, and that is only because of this job. There's obviously Jamieson and Smith as well. I've knit lots of things in their yarn,
but they're fairly interchangeable as well.
Between the 2-ply jumper weight and the spindrift, which is also a 2-ply jumper weight, but just has a name. Yes, they are interchangeable. And I don't. There's not like I have a preference of one over the other.
So in North America, how popular is that really woolly wool? Because people have an emphasis on softness.
Yes, they do. I mean, I think that there is a bit of a shift back to it. Right? I do think it's increasing. Yeah. I mean, I sort of feel like there's always been an interest in it, which there has, obviously, because it's got that sort of traditional quality to it. But I do think that there is a building interest in it. Because, I think we've had the superwash, phase, and that being the only thing that people are working with. And people, again, I think just with more podcasts and classes and education around it, people are realizing what the special qualities are of working with a wool like that. The fact that it isn't going to grow, that just all the aspects that make it what it is and make it good for specific things like Fair Isle,
but also good for the environment, right? Because particularly the Jamesons, it's actually grown in the Shetlands. And then it's milled in the Shetlands, and then
Shetland.
Sorry, I'm done again.
I just can't help it.
In Shetland, and then it's dyed there as well, and the Jamesons and Smith as well. That's sent away, but it's still grown and kind of produced in Scotland, right?
Yes,
so it's kind of
same
shape, close to the origin. Close to the origin.
Yeah.
And of course, it's totally biodegradable as well.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
So in terms of fast fashion or more sustainable fashion, wool, and particularly wool that's not superwash wool. So as soon as you get that superwash wool, you've got that chemical process which is kind of stripping away the outside. So that is quite a different, and of course adding in nylon, which people will do for sock wool. But you can knit socks from a very high twist. Wool. But I guess that's the people. I read Elizabeth Zimmerman's book. She said in the early days of nylon, they used to put whole double the wool with fishing line, like the nylon that you use for fishing.
They can't be good for your feet.
We probably need to wind up soon. But I'm the timekeeper.
Oh, you're the timekeeper. Oh my goodness. Can I just quickly ask a little bit about the colours? Do you have an arts or a sciences background? So you're going with like a what's your colour theory there?
I definitely don't approach it from a sort of colour theory side of things, because I don't have that art background. I trained as a classical singer when I left school, it's more just a sort of palette sense that I come from, and definitely swatching, what's nice now with this job is that sometimes I have parameters enforced upon me because certain colours are not available, so I just can't use those. I have to use what's in stock because people want those colours. And if we have a lot of a colour in stock, then I'm figuring out a way to use it. And so it's kind of pushed my own personal boundaries or whatever on colours that I would potentially choose. I think that there's a particular aesthetic, whatever, that I'm drawn to, which is maybe more in that autumnal kind of colour range or whatever. People sort of seem to say, oh, well, that's classic, good. And I wouldn't necessarily think that the same way, but and I obviously I do learn. I have learned things as I've explored Fair Isle knitting more, and that wasn't part of my early designing. I didn't do colour work, so that came a bit later. So applying those principles that are about the contrast, having enough contrast for the motif to stand out, and all that kind of thing.
I really like what you were saying about having the background colours kind of go together, so there wasn't a break in them, and the pattern colours go together, and then that pop. That's quite interesting for the motif ones.
Pop of blue.
Yeah, this isn't a traditional Fair Isle motif. This yoke is kind of made up of motifs that in a way merge together. So in a way you have more freedom there. But what we were doing in class...
So it's more like the middle of BB's there, where she's got that bright pop of the purple, but she's sort of got the background as those two dark browns. But there's clearly two there, but you have to look closely to see
that's that sort of Fair Isle, that's classic Fair Isle knitting rules or whatever. Is that you're trying not to cut the pattern. We've talked about that. You're trying not to have too much of a jump between the two background colours and not between the pattern colours too. So I think about those things for sure, but then it's taste that comes into it for sure.
I wanted to ask a little bit about you coming here.
Yeah.
How did it come about? Did James just reach out to you randomly?
Yes. I had decided that we needed to come to see my sister, who lives here. She's been here for 18 years, and we have not visited her. I usually see her back in Scotland, so I'll go over there too when she's there. And I had finally said to my husband, like, okay, like the kids have left home now, and like we just need to go.
Yeah.
And literally 2 weeks later, I think we hadn't booked anything. I get a message from James on Instagram.
Oh,
it's like,
serendipity.
I'm thinking of organising this event, and I was wondering if you'd like to be the keynote speaker. And
Wow.
I remember, yes,
Yeah.
I know. I'm like running over to my husband, going, "Guess what?" So yes, it's a very much thank you to James for holding this event.
Yes.
That really helped to sort of make the final decision. Like, okay, we're doing this, and and it's been amazing.
But you've traveled around a little too. What's your favorite part of New Zealand outside of this knitting retreat?
South Island, mainland.
I think
Shout out North Island, come on.
I mean, we only flew in and out of Auckland, so I can't get to Auckland. And we haven't. My sister lives in the New Plymouth area, Taranaki. We haven't gone there yet. Going there next. We had an amazing trip. We did a road trip in the South Island in a camper van and had incredible weather. I can't really pick a favourite part.
Well, you haven't been to Hobbiton yet, so that will be your favorite.
Okay.
Yeah, Hobbiton will be the favorite. Go on.
And you went to the Edoras place?
Yes, that was really special because we had, we're big Lord of the Rings fans, and my husband and I had read about Mount Sunday, and we were unsure if we would get there because it's a long dirt road in there, and we were renting a camper van, and they don't let you drive on certain roads. But we did mention it to them, and they said, can you just use your judgment, when you get there? And, it seemed fine. Like, we had to go very slowly, but it did take, a while. So we kind of drove part the way and we were able to camp. And then we did it the next day. And it was very epic. We did a really cheesy, moment of, blasting Lord of the Rings music as we were driving down into it, which was really fun. And there was another couple ahead of us up on the mountain, not really a mountain, but but then they left and it was just us up there, and it was very, very windy. But that was incredible.
It's beautiful.
Thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's been fantastic.
My pleasure. So great to meet you all, and
hopefully it won't be 20 years between visits.
No.
Yeah, are you going to come back now?
Yeah, because James is going to do one in 2 years' time, and then next year it's Morag and Dunedin.
Well, I know Morag already spoke to me about that. She's like, if you're going to be here next year.
Yes, if you're going to be here in March.
Yes.
May as well.
Because Dunedin is fantastic.
Yes, we did stop in Dunedin briefly.
And Oamaru for the dough spins.
Yes. That's right. That's right.
Well, before we stop, I think, before we stop, I want to hear what everyone's wearing.
Oh, yeah.
Because for the sake of the video podcast,
that's what people
are going to say, what is everyone wearing? We're all wearing colorwork jumpers.
Yeah, that's true.
Stephen, start with you.
I'm wearing Troutbeck by Marie Wallen, which I knit myself.
I'm wearing Bressa by Marie Wallen. I had the joy of wearing Bressa on Bressa last year. That
wow.
I'm wearing... Oh, sorry. I'm sorry. What is the yarn?
This is Rebel yarn. Same yarn. It's New Zealand.
Outlaw
yarn from Christchurch, Shout out to Outlaw Yarn and Deb.
And Merino.
Really good.
She's got an absolutely amazing colour range.
Yeah.
Obviously it's not... Jameson's 5 yet.
Hard to compete with Jameson's.
Jameson's
but it's very beautiful yarn, and it's very sticky as well.
Yeah, great for colour.
And it's very much New Zealand yarn.
It's similar to Jameson's.
It's the most similar that you would get to Jameson's here in New Zealand. Yeah.
Anyway, let's move on.
I'm wearing the Porty pullover, which is my own pattern, and it comes as a cardigan, and it comes in kids' versions. I just made mine with short sleeves. So I've got a bit lazy.
Love it.
And it's in Jameson's Spindrift.
Of course it is. Well, I'm wearing my design, a Calypso sweater in
Very nice.
Rowan felted tweed and spin cycle.
I've seen lots of those this weekend.
I've seen some too. It's so exciting.
But it's beautiful, right? And it also comes in a DK, doesn't it?
Yes, yeah. And the spin cycle makes the color work easy because you only have one other color.
No, it's beautiful. I'm wearing something from the 70s, which was knitted for me as a full-size jumper with tight sleeves and a tight neck by one of my relatives, who I unfortunately don't know which one it was. And it's all hand spun natural yarn, except for this one here is dyed, and I suspect it's dyed with a natural dye.
The madder, maybe.
Madder, yeah.
Could have been, yeah. And then it had holes in it, and it didn't quite fit. Because I'm now not the same size as I was when I was 14. So I ripped the neck off. So I put this neck here and the cuff bands and the waist here, which is where it was because there was a hole in it, is matched from the Wild Earth Naturals range in Christchurch.
That's a lovely New Zealand wool as well.
Yeah.
That's how
So
new.
it's a very kind of upcycled crop top.
Yeah. But the whole outfit is working.
Thank you. It's very polemic, this outfit. The skirt, in fact. People either think that colour should not be worn as clothes.
Or they love it.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Anyway, thank you very much for coming.
Wow. That was amazing. Sounds like you had a fantastic time.
No, we did. And it was so nice to be with those other podcasters there as well, because, of course, knitting podcasts are all over the place.
Yeah, I didn't realise how numerous they were and, you know, like YouTube, so you can sit there and YouTube.
People just love to sit there and listen, like just knit, and then, like, it's like social knitting, but you can do it by yourself.
Oh, so it's a perfect hobby for introverts. Yeah.
It's the perfect hobby, yeah. And you can just have the podcast going
and stuff. But knitting's fantastic. And we've got a beautiful example here of a hat, which is a wee bit unkind to describe it as a hat because it's kind of like a tea cozy. But and if you think about, you know, your great-grandmother's beautiful tea cozy, but and only because it's still not quite finished. We've got 2 rows to go. In New Zealand, you should have done a go-round, but never mind. It'll be a bit
But we'll
hard
take a picture of it and we'll put it on the site.
It just looks like a wee bit of a ornament on the top. But they do actually have it, other than being handy to keep your head warm, they do actually have a very useful purpose. Yeah,
so these ones here, this one's called Te Hupanui. And that is the te reo name for Greytown. And as the wool festival, we made James, who was organising it, made a pattern for the festival. And it's quite common, the Shetland Wool Week do it as well. So every year there's a pattern for the festival. It's a different pattern, different beanie for each festival. And they get released a couple of months before the festival, and everyone buys the pattern, and the proceeds go to a charity usually.
Oh, cool.
So the proceeds from this one go to the hospice in Greytown, Te Hupanui. And yeah, so this is the flowers are from the Shetlands because it was a joint Greytown Shetlands thing, and this is the wave here is the beach, and then this is a bird that's diving down, and then it's got this kind of cool top here. But yeah, the Shetland knitters are known for being the fastest knitters in the world. So they
speed knitting.
Speed knitting, yeah, it's a real thing. And if you look it up on YouTube, it's absolutely fantastic. There's some amazing clips there, and you just think, oh my God, how can that be a thing?
Do that?
But yeah, Hazel Tyndall from the Shetlands is the world record holder, and has been for some time. I think she still is. Anyway, they obviously knit with those big long belts and stuff, so it's a whole thing. But because they were knitting piecemeal for money, so it's all about efficiency. And you have to knit swatches because you have to try the colours and the patterns together. I mean, people knit swatches for gauge, but I'm sure that anyone who's knitting Shetland yarn for a long time, they know what their gauge is.
Yeah, exactly.
Like gauges the dimensions that you get from a particular needle and
stitch
yarn with a certain stitch.
Yeah.
Because it will change depending on whether you're doing colour work or just knit or garter stitch, which is knits on both sides. But anyone who's knitting the same yarn all the time, they will know what their gauge is by size. So what they're really using swatches for is to look at the colour combination with the pattern and see how it works. And of course you've got all those amazing colours. And so instead of knitting just a swatch, because that's a waste of time in a way, even though swatches are very important, people, we're not disagreeing with that. If there's all knitters out there listening to me, they're very controversial. But anyway, in the Shetland Islands, people tend to knit hats or gloves or socks. So you can see the pattern, you can see the colours, but you end up with a thing.
Something you can use.
That you can use, yeah. So that's the idea behind the hats. And they serve an extra purpose because they're a fundraiser. And then everybody at the Wool Festival has the same hat style, but different colours everywhere. So they take beautiful, because everyone does them in their own colour scheme, so they are beautiful, yeah. And of course, I didn't quite get mine finished in time for the festival, so I'm not in the photo. And on that note, we shall
finish our episode, The Wonders of Wool.
The Wonders of Wool. Thank you very much. And thanks to Gudrun for very good-naturedly letting us interview. You've been listening to the OI podcast, the shout-out for the arts, sciences and Mataranga Māori.
You can support this podcast by becoming a member of the OI. Check out the Otago Institute for Arts and Sciences on Facebook or our website.
If you'd like to listen again to this episode or others from the series, look for the OI podcast on ORFM's website, oar.org.nz.
Brought to you by the Otago Institute for Arts and Sciences, the Otago branch of the Royal Society of New Zealand.
This podcast was produced by ORFM Dunedin with support from New Zealand On the Air.